Imagine a city so wealthy, so legendary, that explorers spent decades crossing oceans and deserts just for the chance it might exist. Now imagine that city was real and that its ruler, in a single afternoon, nearly broke the entire economy of the medieval world. This is the story of Mansa Musa, the man history would quietly forget for centuries, and the journey that changed everything. In the early 14th century, the world was a patchwork of kingdoms, sultanates, and empires, each believing themselves to be the center of civilization. Europe was crawling out of the Middle Ages, battered by plague and famine. The Mongol Empire had begun to fracture. The Ottoman dynasty was still young. And in West Africa, an empire had been quietly growing for generations, so vast, so rich, and so removed from the maps of the known world that most people beyond its borders simply had no idea it existed. The Mali Empire, at its height in the 1300s, was one of the largest empires on Earth. It stretched from the Atlantic coast of modern-day Senegal all the way east past the Niger River, encompassing parts of what are now Mali, Guinea, Senegal, Gambia, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. It controlled the most critical trade routes in the African continent, and those trade routes carried one thing above all else: gold. The gold fields of West Africa, places like Bambouk and Bure, were so productive that historians estimate the Mali Empire controlled roughly half of the world's entire gold supply at that time. Half! The empire didn't just have gold, it was gold. And sitting at the top of this empire, at the beginning of 1324, was a man named Mansa Musa. Mansa was not a name, it was a title. It meant King of Kings. And the man who carried it, born Musa Keita, had ruled Mali since around 1312. He was educated, deeply religious, a skilled administrator, and by virtually every historical account, profoundly wise about when to act and when to wait. Under his rule, the empire had expanded, trade had flourished, and the great city of Timbuktu had transformed from a regional hub into one of the most important centers of learning in the Islamic world. But in 1324, Mansa Musa decided it was time to do something that no ruler of Mali had ever done on this scale before. He would make the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, required of every Muslim who is physically and financially able to make it. For most people, the Hajj was a matter of personal faith. For Mansa Musa, it became the most spectacular display of wealth the medieval world had ever witnessed. What he was planning wasn't simply a religious journey. It was a procession, an announcement, a statement written not in ink, but in gold and silk, and the sheer, staggering weight of one empire's fortune on the move. The caravan that assembled in Niani in the capital city in 1324 is almost impossible to visualize from a modern perspective. Contemporary accounts, written by Arab scholars, Egyptian officials, and travelers who either witnessed it or interviewed those who did, describe a traveling city of somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 people. Historians debate the precise numbers, as they do with most medieval accounts, but even the most conservative estimates are breathtaking. There were soldiers, servants, camel drivers, merchants, doctors, and scholars. There were officials carrying staffs of gold. There were hundreds of camels, each loaded with bags of gold dust. Some accounts mention 500 enslaved servants walking ahead of Mansa Musa, each one carrying a golden staff weighing several pounds. And at the center of it all moved the Mansa himself, surrounded by his court, dressed in fine fabrics, riding through the desert with the quiet confidence of a man who had never had reason to doubt that the world would make way for him. The route took the caravan north through the Sahara Desert, then northeast through Egypt. The Sahara crossing alone was a feat of logistics that most rulers of the time would never have attempted,
Crossing one of the most brutal environments on Earth, with tens of thousands of people and thousands of animals, required planning, knowledge, and resources that only an empire of Mali's scale could provide. When the caravan finally reached Egypt in the summer of 1324, it created an immediate sensation. Cairo was one of the great cities of the medieval world, a center of trade, scholarship, and power. The Mamluk Sultanate ruled Egypt at the time, and its ruler, Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad, was himself a man of considerable prestige. He sent word inviting Mansa Musa to an official audience. And here, at this meeting, is where history quietly begins to turn in an unexpected direction. Mansa Musa was known for his deep religious faith, and with that faith came a sense of protocol that complicated the royal meeting. In Islamic tradition, prostrating oneself before anyone other than God was considered inappropriate for a devout Muslim. Mansa Musa reportedly declined to bow before the Egyptian sultan in the customary way, a diplomatic moment that could have become a serious incident. According to various accounts, a compromise was eventually reached. The meeting proceeded, and the two rulers acknowledged each other without either losing face. But the real story of what happened in Egypt wasn't playing out in royal halls, it was playing out in the markets. Mansa Musa was generous, extraordinarily, almost recklessly generous. He gave gifts to officials, to scholars, to the poor, to anyone who came before him. He gave gold to mosques. He gave gold to merchants. He distributed gold in the streets. He spent it on supplies, on buildings, on goodwill. His entourage shopped in the markets of Cairo with an enthusiasm that stunned local merchants, paying prices that bore almost no relation to what things actually cost, simply because they could. It is estimated that during his time in Egypt, which lasted several weeks, Mansa Musa and his caravan introduced somewhere in the range of 15 to 18 tons of gold into the Egyptian economy. That number, adjusted for modern understanding of medieval economic conditions, represents a sum so enormous that economists have struggled to assign it a modern equivalent. And here is where something remarkable happened, something that no one in that caravan could have predicted, something that Mansa Musa himself almost certainly did not intend. All that gold flooding into the Egyptian market didn't make Egypt richer, it made gold worthless. When the supply of any commodity increases dramatically and suddenly, its value drops. This is basic economics, and it was as true in the 13th century as it is today. Gold was the foundation of trade and currency across the Mediterranean world. When Mansa Musa flooded Cairo with gold, it destabilized the very thing that made it valuable. Prices rose as gold became less scarce. The purchasing power of the gold that Egyptian merchants and traders already held collapsed. Goods that had cost a certain amount in gold now required significantly more of it. Historians who have studied this episode estimate that the Egyptian economy experienced severe inflation for approximately 12 years after Mansa Musa's visit. 12 years! A single pilgrimage caravan caused more than a decade of economic disruption in one of the most powerful nations in the medieval world, not through war, not through invasion, not through any act of aggression, but through pure, overwhelming abundance. To his credit, Mansa Musa eventually recognized what had happened. On his return journey through Egypt, he attempted to stabilize things by borrowing gold back from Egyptian merchants at high interest rates, deliberately taking gold out of circulation to reduce the supply and restore some of its value. It was, in its own way, one of the earliest documented examples of deliberate monetary intervention by a ruler aware of macroeconomic consequences. Whether it worked fully or only partially is difficult to say, but the attempt itself speaks to something important about the man who made it. The caravan continued to Mecca, where Mansa Musa completed the Hajj. He reportedly met with the Sultan of Mali, who had taken refuge in the holy city, and also encountered a Spanish poet and architect named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who had traveled to Mecca from Andalusia. Mansa Musa was so impressed by al-Sahili's intellect and artistic sensibility that he invited him to return to Mali. Al-Sahili accepted, and he would go on to design some of the most iconic structures in West Africa, including mosques and royal buildings in Timbuktu and other cities of the empire, buildings whose distinctive earthen architecture still influences the region to this day. When Mansa Musa returned to Mali, he came back changed, not in character, but in scope. He brought scholars, books, and architects. He invested in expanding the great Sankore Mosque in Timbuktu, which would grow into a university, attracting students and scholars from across the Islamic world. At its height, the University of Sankore held a library of somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million manuscripts, making it one of the most significant collections of knowledge in the world at that time. Timbuktu